All right, we are live. It is Sunday, the 13th of September, and today we have Magenta Pixie, Jen, and Nina Starsong. Tara and Chrissy are not able to make it. Laura's going to see if she can join us shortly. So before we begin, our topic today is divine union, and this is the relationship, the marriage with Source, with God. And what we're going to do first is step up into our hearts, just to make sure we have a nice, beautiful, open heart. And then we're going to see how this conversation blossoms. So please focus your attention on the area of your heart, imagining that the breath is flowing in and out of the heart space, breathing in and out a little slower and deeper than usual. And let's just make an active intention to feel compassion, care, and love for self and everyone that is with us here today that may hear the words in the future. Let's do that for a minute. And bring it back when you're ready. Now that we're in our glorious hearts, let's talk about Source. So if I could just share my understanding, which is really difficult, because as soon as you label something, we limit it, right? But from the guides, what they've taught me, Source, God, the universe, is the infrastructure, the tapestry, the force essentially that animates all life. And they say that there's nothing outside of God, nothing. Even fear is of God, but it's claimed itself in separation. And this topic is so timely because, as you've shared, Magenta, a number of times, the end of separation, we're in it now, right? We're at the end of the Kali Yuga cycle. We have gone about as far away from Source as we can. And that's the reason why we've created what we've created on the planet, being a heartless world, right? Human beings are viewed as objects as opposed to human beings. And we've made the sinner the sin, as opposed to a human being who's made a choice that could have got them in a jackpot. But the result of that choice, that karmic backlash or cause and effect, is none of our business. It's their journey with Source. So, gosh, how do we begin this? I can say that I've had a direct interaction with Source, with God, if you will. And the only way I can explain it was about maybe a decade ago, and I was walking in the woods, and it was like, and I wrote in my journal when I went home, I met presence today. That's actually what I wrote. I couldn't even find the words. And it was kind of like somebody's head peeking out of an invisible curtain, like a presence, and then it moved back. And I was like, oh, what was that? And then, as I say, the only thing I could write was, I met presence today. And then Sandra Walter was doing some kind of an update, a little bit, she does like grid work. And she was doing an update, and the way that she described it, I love how you always get your answers from universe through symbolism or for other people. And the way she described it was like this. And I'm like, oh my God, that was totally it. Like, hello. Anyway, I'm going to open with that. That was my first direct experience with presence. And there's so much, of course, beyond that. But anyway, what about you girls?
So I'd like to share, I had a very, very powerful spiritual awakening when I was 21, and it was the first time that I went to India, and I'd come from a very strict Catholic background, and I'd really, really rejected the word God, and it really was my worst word in the English dictionary. Anyway, I ended up in India, and I was high up in the mountains, and this woman just appeared, and she came, there was about 10 of us, and she just sort of manifested in front of me, and she said to me, you must chant the mantra Om Namah Shivaya. And I was so innocent. I'd never even heard of Om Namah Shivaya. But she was so adamant. She said about 50 times, you must keep chanting Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. So I was like, okay, I'll do it. And then we went up, we did this massive like 24-hour trek. It was horrendous. It was like, oh my God, it was like hell on earth. I was carrying this massive rucksack up these vertical mountains, like just going Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. And I was so tested and challenged. And we got to the very top of the mountain, and the group sort of went to be by the orchard, and I felt a really strong urge to be on my own. And so I went to the edge of the mountain cliff, and I was just saying Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. And then at that moment, I looked up in the sky, and this flash of light just appeared in the sky. And then all of a sudden, my third eye completely and utterly blasted open, and it was tightly sealed, closed, you know, and it just went boosh like that. And suddenly it was like I knew I was in the presence of God. And I was like, the first thing I realized was that God wasn't some horrible judgmental man that my Catholic religion had enforced upon me. I was like, God is love. God is eternal presence. God is eternity. God is the ocean of consciousness from which my soul was created, from which my soul shall return. God is the truth that I must be in every single moment of my existence. That is the absolute truth. So in that moment, my third eye just blasted open, and it was like all of a sudden this light just started like pouring in through my crown. And as it was like pouring in, I was being filled up by this light, and then it got down to my to my navel center. And then suddenly it was like I was shown that that's where I carried all my fear. So I was very, very deep soul, I was a very deep thinker, very philosophical, and I thought deeply about everything. So I had a lot of fears that were stored in my navel center. So as soon as the light got to my navel center, I just started like crying and just releasing, because I knew that if it was fear, it wasn't real, that only love is real, that fear only exists in the realm of, in the temporary realms, and therefore, but that in and of itself makes it not in real. And so I had this like enormous sense of like relief. It was like, oh my God, all those moments, and I was so scared. I thought I was alone. I thought I was abandoned. And I was like, it was just all an illusion. It was all just a lie. I had never, ever left God's grace or God's heart. And so the light just filled my being, and it was just this amazing homecoming of my third eye being blasted open. And the funny thing was, because I wasn't even looking for God, I was like looking for my soulmate. I was like really on a mission to find my soulmate. And I ended up finding God. And then I had this experience, and it lasted about maybe 5 or 10 minutes. And I now look at it as an overdose. Like I literally got overdosed. Like sometimes, like God normally gives like little spoons to his children, her children. God gave me the whole bottle, and I was just like, I just like drank the whole bottle. And so I was like, literally, I woke up the next morning. So no, after that experience, I was strongly guided to tell my soul brother Dean what had just happened to me. And so I went and I told him, and he said that exactly the same thing had happened when he was 21. So I was like, oh wow, that was amazing. And then I woke up the next morning, and the next morning it was like, then I started having this Kundalini awakening, and it was just like I was just getting like rushes and rushes of downloads, angelic downloads, and they were just explaining to me about the nature of reality, about eternity, about love, about creation, about the soul, about the spirit, and all this stuff that it was like to me, prior to that experience, love was a 2-dimensional word. Eternity was a 2-dimensional word. It was just a word on a piece of paper. I had absolutely no comprehension of eternity or what real love is. But lo and behold, the next day, I was just like getting download upon download of like what that really, really is, what that really, really means. And that was then combined with this like ecstatic Kundalini rushes, which just didn't stop for about 6 months. And so I literally had like an intense overdose of God. And so going back to that first day when it was all sort of happening, and it was like suddenly I had my third eye was open, and then I had access to the Akashic records. All sorts came online for me. But then my spirit team, they told me about my destiny. They said, your main destiny is to work with children. You're going to be a spiritual teacher, and you're going to work with children. And actually, my main gift is working with children. But they said also you will work with the child in all adults that you connect with. Your job is to hold that vibration of the innocence of the divine child, and to be an embodiment of that, so that's like given permission in this matrix to be the child self. So they said to me my main work was going to be working with children, and the child self in adults. They said I was going to be a musician, and they said I was going to be a fashion designer. And I was like, wow, I'm going to be a fashion designer. I was like most blown away by that. And they were like, yep, you're going to be a fashion designer. And so I sort of like received my destiny, if you like, and then it just went into, I just had this experience of like an expansion of like Kundalini consciousness, of like unity consciousness, of God consciousness, and I just overdosed. I was absolutely overdosed on God, you know. So this is like my favorite topic, really.
I'm gonna get you to stop there so that we can get a bit more, and that's quite amazing.
Yeah.
Share one quick thing.
Yeah.
This is really funny. In one of my meditations, when I was like just learning how to meditate, like everything moved. And then I found it later on that day, we actually had an earthquake in Toronto. I thought it was like some kind of like crazy experience, but we actually literally had an earthquake, and that's what I felt was moving. Anyway, Magenta, if you wish to add to that. Thank you, Jen. That was
yeah. Thank you, Jen. Wow, that's an amazing story. Really interesting to listen to, and you're so connected when you tell the story, and so full up of love and joy, you know. And it's interesting that you were looking for your soulmate, because that's a reflection of source. The relationships that we have, especially our romantic relationships, is the physical reflection of source, the twin flame energy. I just think this is probably the most vast subject you could possibly choose, and for me to pinpoint a moment when I felt I had a connection with source, God, the divine, whichever word you want to use, very difficult to pinpoint that, because I feel since my conscious awakening, and I feel that energy has been there, you know, since I was born in this lifetime, and you know, beyond that, as far as I can remember back. But since my conscious awakening, which I would say was in 1993, I've been, I wouldn't say permanently in the early days of awakening, but in the last sort of, oh crumbs, decade or 15 years or so, I just feel like it's not far off a permanent connection for me. When I feel it the most, I guess, is when I'm channeling the nine, especially when I'm writing the information that they bring forward, because my connection with them is so very unified, and they are the emanation representative of source, if not simply source themselves, but the individualized aspect, so that they can communicate with me. And I have actually spoken to them from that perspective, as in that they are source. You know, if you look at the emanation behind the presentation of 9 white-winged beings, if you go beyond that into that sort of universal cosmic expression of divinity and source, and everything you were saying, Paula, this oneness, this field. So you know, I can't really pinpoint one experience. There's been multiple experiences, too many to really mention. And I just feel like it is a permanent thing for me, and that's where I feel I am most of the time. And I think, you know, for these times now, that's what will carry us through, because when you have that connection with source, that's the open chakra system, that's the open heart, that's the open third eye, as Jen was saying, that's the grounded connection through the base chakra. And this gives us the ability to work with the multidimensional and work with everything that's occurring on the physical level. I feel that if you don't have that connection with source or God or Christ, or, as I said, divinity, whatever word you want to call it, then moving through this time period in 2020 and what's to come in the rest of 2020 and beyond that is going to be so very challenging for you if you don't have that connection, because that connection's guiding you. It feels like guidance, it feels like protection, it feels like all will always be well, and it's the truth. When you're in the alignment to that connection, you do tend to dodge dangers and issues that would put you in harm, and you do tend to gravitate towards beautiful experiences now more than ever, as we're having this emanation coming back into our present time from this future sort of new earth ascension paradigm. So it's a permanent thing, I feel, with me. But the time I feel most connected, I feel it is when I'm working with the nine and bringing them through, especially when I'm writing the things that they say. But in another way, meditation. And I may not have any focus at all that the nine are there or have any communication with them, but that also connects me into what I would call 0 point, but that of course is source as well. So it is a unification with me, and a sort of a permanent thing. I don't feel cut off from it, even when I'm feeling cut off from it, if you know what I mean. I still know that that connection's there. So it's the most vast subject, really, that we could talk about this forever and we wouldn't even touch 1% of it.
Yeah, because we haven't even included how nature speaks to you, how God speaks to you through nature, right? Through insects and flies and sparrows and birds and hummingbirds and thanks, Magenta.
Well, I relate on so many levels with everything that you all just shared, of course. And just right now in this moment, I'm feeling so much of the romantic Rose Ray, Christ Magdalene aspect to all of it, which I've always felt. I experienced that from the time I was a child. I just didn't know, oh, this is this energy. But I remember being by the ocean, because I grew up on the water. And as I would play by the ocean, I remember knowing and feeling that something was observing me through me as I was observing it. And it was the most amazing amount of love I had ever felt, but it was so natural and organic that it wasn't like I was like, oh, that's God, or that's what they talk about in church. To me, those two things didn't really go together. So it was this great mystery, like, wow, what is this force that thinks I am just like the most beautiful thing ever? What is this force that is so kind and so loving to me in my being? What is this? And when I sing, why does it delight in me? And why do the birds sing for it? And when the ocean flows, I can feel it. And so I started to really understand that it was all connected, and that I was connected to everything. And then I had the ability to communicate. So I would look at the flowers and think, wow, you're so beautiful. And they would say back to me, you're so beautiful. So I started to understand this was this strong connection, that was this energy that we were all connected to. And the best way that I could describe it was it's love, it's beauty, it's sparkly. For me, that came in the ideas of unicorns and fairies and rainbows and mermaids and like crystalline frequencies, angels, because I could see and communicate with the angels. And as I've grown up, of course, the journey has been to understand that that is what I'm married to first and foremost. And when I first really got that, I was in a relationship that was ending, and it was just heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking. And the kind of pattern that's had repeated for me is a lot of men have wanted to control or trap me. Now that's my own karma. I take responsibility for that, but that was the shadow that I had to walk through with the masculine. And I remember that as I was leaving this I was living in this incredibly gorgeous house in Honolulu, in Hawaii, actually in Princeville. I had picturesque views of the ocean, and whales would jump, but I was living in someone else's castle. And it became very clear that this beauty was actually like a control system. I was not free here. So I had sort of an awakening with Source in me, and a come to Source moment, sitting on the floor, looking around at everything that was gorgeous and realizing that I couldn't live in this illusion, which was actually a trap. I couldn't live in someone else's castle. So I made a devotion that day, and I merged my hands with what was, I feel to be now, my future 5D self. But I married God that day. And when I did, I had a tremendous Kundalini awakening. And it didn't end for years. But it was like, Jen, it was like what you were talking about. It wasn't just a little bit, it was so much that it became orgasmic for me. And I was kind of orgasmic all the time, but it would happen at really uncomfortable times, driving a car, things like that. I was just overly accelerated. And I understand now what that is. Star seeds, that some of us that are carrying this Stargate energy, we are resonating with that. I understand that now. But at the time, I was a single girl in my 20s. It was really scary for me. And a lot of men were very aware that I was, resonating this type of energy. So I felt very protective of myself. But now, and especially going through this divorce right now, I've been having the most magical 10 days of divine romance, and just completely understanding that this is the divine twin flame relationship within me. This is the king queen merged within me. And that when we connect to that and we start to love ourselves the way that loves us, then that shows up outside of us as a reflection of that. But it doesn't work the other way around. So I'll share more, but there's just been some really amazing things that have happened the past 10 days that have just blown my mind. I mean, Christ moments that I'm so grateful for.
Thank you so much for the share, Nina. Can I do a shameless plug as well, since we're talking about alchemy? Now, can I please? So this book, Alchemy, because you just said about the doorway, you said about and maybe, I'm sure, Magenta, you have some wisdom you can add to this with all the 9 that have gifted you with. But I just want to read this little bit because it's exactly what you shared, Nina. Grace is permitted in the agreement of what can be. It has cause to act, and your presence, your individual presence, becomes the doorway for the light to shine through. The light to shine through. You are the window, the portal, the doorway, the ambassador. You create the bridge that others may walk through and lift above the old in consequence to the alignment that has been accepted as potential. I just love that. And so Alchemy is by Paul Selig. And as I say, I love them for teachers. But so how on earth did we get here as a human species, being so far from source? Like, it's almost as, well, thank God it's not as dangerous now to admit that you like Trump, that you support God. At one point, coming out of the closet and sharing that could be a bit of a challenge. But I shared that when I was 13 years old, so this is maybe how we got here. When I was 13, we had a thunderstorm, and I remember I was frightened by the thunder. And I was calling to my mom, and she was downstairs in the laundry. And she said, oh, what's the matter? And I said, oh, I'm scared, right? The thunder is like right above the house. And she said, that is God, and he's very angry. And I was like, I said, what do you mean? And she said, that is a very jealous God. And this is what my mom taught me when I was a little girl, which would be why I might step back and go, oh, I don't want to, Jen's point, I don't want a relationship with this angry dude that's judgmental, and, you do something wrong, you're going to, spend years and years and years in purgatory and hell. But she told me that God was very angry, and that he took her father away from her when she was only 12. Both my parents lost their dads when they were only 12, both my mom and my dad. But maybe that is why. But I'm curious as to what you guys think. How did we get so steered away from the truth of our being, from the truth of our innate kindness and goodness? Because love, we've got this idea of what love is, but it feels to me more that love is not an emotion. It's a current of being. It's a way we be. It's like It just is kindness, this compassion, this non-judgmental, like it's pure innocence. I'll just park that there.
Well, how we got here, you could look at it in two different ways. From one perspective, we chose to be separate from Source because we are Source, we are God. So Source wanted or sent out a pulse, a creational pulse, wanting to experience all and everything. And one of the things within that all and everything is separation. One needs to go as far away from Source as one can, into complete and utter separation, having Source totally cut off from them and not even remembering Source or understanding Source or the unity with Source in order to find it, because that is what allows Source to look at itself. So if you're looking at it in a linear journey, Source is pulsing and doesn't know what Source is. Source is all innocence. It doesn't know what it is. So when it goes through these multi-universal experiences throughout time and space and comes back, having been separate and back into the unity, it then looks at itself from the all-knowing perspective and merges back with itself. So Source is all innocence and all-knowing. That's the journey, that's the linear journey. But from another perspective, and this is more of a fourth and third dimensional perspective, we were pure Source beings and we were hijacked. There were others that took our memories of Source and memories of unity with Source from us by reducing our DNA. So from one level, it was a choice we all made. And from another level, it was a hijacking. It was an infiltration. That's the way the nine have taught me to see the response to your question. How did we get here? That's what the nine have taught me. These two perspectives to bear in mind so that we can understand how we got here. But it's interesting still, the differences of understanding and awareness and belief system that people have, because I just finished doing a video series and I uploaded the second video in the series. It's 5 videos. I uploaded the second one yesterday and I'm talking about the diamond convergence, the diamond core, the ascension timeline, the paradise timeline, the 9, divinity, all of these things. I didn't say the word God within that video, but as far as I'm concerned, well, that goes without saying. But somebody actually wrote a comment saying, what about God? What about God in all of this? You know, what about Jesus Christ? As if to say, well, you talk about the diamond core, you talk about divinity, you talk about the 9, you talk about ascension, paradise, Eden. What about God? And to me, it's interesting that somebody, because to me, that's still separation, because you don't realize that the diamond core is an emanation of God, and God is only one word to explain this energy, this pulse. It's Source, divinity, the diamond codes, diamond light, expansion, whatever name you want to give to your guidance system, the angelic frequency. There are so many ways to explain this. The force, you know, if you're a scientist, you might say the God particle. You might not even be religious at all or use religious terminology. So to actually think that God's the only word you can use to actually describe God, you're still in separation. And there's another perspective. There is a force known as God that is a fourth dimensional trapping entity that actually comes in and hijacks the souls of those who work with religious paradigm, who have moved into separation. And it's a false paradigm created by the service to self structure to trap the souls. So God, on the one hand, is everything. You can use the word God to describe all, the pulse, source, prime creator, but it can also be used in a negative connotation as a hijacking program. So I think really we need to understand terminology and the fact that when one person says one thing, they may be meaning what you mean when you use a different word. And I know it's difficult because you've got all these spiritually awakened individuals all using similar terminology that may be for different things. So I might say, look at this crystal river, using the crystal river as a metaphor for the Schumann resonance. Somebody else might think the crystal river is the tears you cry, or the beautiful light that you emanate when you meditate, and not the Schumann resonance at all. So I think we need to realize terminology and semantics. And for somebody to think that I can sit and talk for a whole hour and a half about the diamond convergence and not actually be talking about God, that's baffling to me. But it's not a word I use. I don't really use the word, simply because what you were saying, Nina, the religious connotation of the word God and Jesus Christ is beautiful when you can see it in its entirety, but because of the hijacking, many people can't get past the instant resistance reaction they get to words like God and Jesus, whereas words like source, prime creator, unified field, 0 point, diamond core, pulse, those words tend to be embraced, certainly within the light worker, new age communities, and beyond into sort of more scientific paradigms. But of course God, and I know you use the word God all the time, Jen, and it's beautiful, and if you can see the true meaning of it, but there is a religious connotation that's part of a hijacking as well. So I think that's just important to sort of say.
Yeah, because it's perception, right? And you're right, Magenta, words are very limiting. They're very, very limiting. You can say a word, and it really depends on the vocabulary and the interpretation the receiver hearing that word is going to, how they're going to shape it. Yeah, and of course, religion has distorted a lot. I'm not saying anything against religion, but there has been a little bit of a distortion there in the idea of what source is, what God. And I too, like you, Jen, in the beginning, I obviously, from what my mom taught me, right, I was like, oh my God, I don't want anything to do with that dude, right? Like, you just stay there. But it wasn't until I was introduced to Neil Donald Walsh and his book 9, At Home with God and a Life That Never Ends. That book, that was a day where I had intended to go to Chapters. That's our like bookstore here in Canada. And I had a list of books I wanted to get in the back of the car. And my own inner being said, you don't need the list, you'll get what you need. And I went in, and I was in completely the wrong section of the bookstore. And it was literally like angels started to sing and lights went on, like, oh, it's like, oh my goodness, this book, it's illuminated. So I pick up the book, and it was that one by Neil Donald Walsh. And I also got the one by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, that day, and Marianne Williamson's Return to Love. That was like 10, 15 years ago. But when I read that book, that was when I was like, okay, maybe this idea of God that I've been told is distorted. Maybe that's not right. And now, of course, I know completely it's not right, because I just think about source, like you were talking about your connection with all the time. I just think about that, and I'm overflowing with internal joy and love. Like, it's just like, and I also find now that when I ask questions in my mind, they're answered before I even start the first word, which I think is super awesome. Oh yeah, of course. And you don't even get the what, and then it's answered. It's very cool.
It's funny, Paula, because I'm in Florida right now, and 15 years ago, I was in Florida, and I also was led to that book, Conversations with God, and that was also a huge kind of activation for me to understand how much I could be conversing with God. And I remember walking along the beach at the ocean, just so overwhelmed by how open I felt to conversing with this frequency. So it's just very interesting to be sitting here again in Florida and to come full circle. And I think to myself, well, Source knew the whole time that I would be sitting here in this moment in Florida with all of you ladies. And these are the types of things that just I delight in, that it's the magic of life and of Source, and how much the divine loves us so much. But I also agree with this about religion, and I got to experience that shadow side as well, very much so. So I do understand that this word God can be used, and there is an entity, which actually I would say is more like a Luciferian entity, in that it wants to entrap you, enslave you. It wants you to feel like a sinner. It wants you to feel like you're dirty, you're bad, you're marked with a scarlet letter. And that is also, of course, something that we created to experience and something we have to walk through. I think it's really important that we don't look at any of this as being victims. None of us are victims of religion. None of us are victims of any of this. It's all just experience. But when you start to understand that you're sovereign in the experience, you start to really discern what frequencies of experience you are being attracted to, or what you're choosing. And a lot of us were taught, what we were not taught is that there's this force that is God that has power over you. You have no choice, you have no will, you have no say in anything, and you're just a, dirty sinner. And without this force directing you, good luck. And that's so sad, because I know that there was, when I was sitting in church as a little girl, there was the minister was talking about hell. And I turned to my mother afterwards and I looked at her and I said, it's not true. And she was like, why do you think that? She was really open. My mother was really open, and she never really bought into the hell stuff either. So she said, why do you think that? And I said, because have you ever looked into a flower? It's so beautiful, and it's made of so much grace, and something that would create that wouldn't create this scary place. It wouldn't damn us to this place. It's not possible. So in that way, I was a bit connected to knowing the truth, but also a bit of a Pollyanna, in the sense that I also denied the shadow aspect. I only wanted to focus on the light, and because of that, I just kept bumping into the shadow over and over and over, which was perfect, but discernment was a huge lesson for me in this, of God saying, this is how much I love you. I love you so much that I really need you to learn discernment, sweetie. The world is a really big, beautiful place, and you're really precious to me, and I really need you to learn discernment.
Yeah, discernment is certainly something that humanity as a collective is being tested in a big way. Hard to tell what the truth is, and that's why, as we stated at the very beginning of this, it's the only thing that is going to get you through this passage is your connection to source. And as I heard it referred to before as your inner net, not the internet, the inner net, the inner being. And as alchemy is saying, the path that is laid before us now will be laid in the step when you take it. Like, it's all about the unknown now. And of course, that is one of the things that humanity as a collective is frightened of, is the unknown. We like to know kind of like what's coming, right? We wake up, the sun comes up, it's going to be daylight. At nighttime, it's going to be dark. What happens when you have, 5 rainbows in the sky and maybe 4 moons all of a sudden? It'd be like, what? Where'd I go? Yeah, so discernment. And Magenta has a great, for everybody that's listening, I'm sure you have already seen it, but has a great teaching on how to discern truth. Magenta, you did a teaching on that. I think it was actually in the Deluge. I think it might have been that same channeling, if I remember, but it was about learning how to discern truth with your own name. So I don't know, do you want to share that now for the listeners in case they haven't heard it? Because there's so much disinformation on the politics and everything else that's going on. I guess, is that a no? Where'd she go?
Oh, no. I have a feeling she would be having some internet issues.
I think she clicked the wrong button. But she'll be back. So anybody else would like to take discernment? I mean, you can feel it, right? When you're connected to source, you can feel that inner bell of truth that just sings. I call it the heart song. For me, when I'm discerning truth or feeling my way into things. anybody else wants to share their experience, because it happens uniquely for all of us, right?
Jen, do you want to share?
Well, I kind of wanted to share about the initial question about like what happened. And so I was shown that at the time of Atlantis, an experiment was allowed to take place. And I was shown that like Martian, this kind of like very, very sort of masculine Martian energy was allowed to infiltrate the electromagnetic grid of the Earth. And it was a decree that was put forth by source energy as we were going to go plunge into the Kali Yuga in order to learn and deeply experience the shadow, in order to bring the shadow ultimately back to God's source. So I was shown this whole timeline of what happened at the time of Atlantis, where this experiment was allowed to take place. And it was this energy, it was almost like the Earth was like protected by a grid, by this electromagnetic grid, but a vulnerability was allowed to take place in the grid, which allowed this nefarious energy to enter. And that had never been allowed because the Earth was protected as a fifth dimensional, it was like connected to Lemuria and Atlantis, it was a fifth dimensional paradise. So once this energy came in, it sought to target the twin flames, because at that point, everyone, like most people, were in divine unions with their divine counterpart, their sort of like an original androgynous divine mate, who they'd split into two forms and they were together. And so with the twin flames being in union, this anchors the vibration of equilibrium and paradise within the field. And so when this nefarious energy entered the grid, it specifically targeted the twin flames. This is what I was shown in a vision. And so there was this energy came into the Earth, which sought to create separation and ownership and control. And this is my land, get off my land, this is my territory. Whereas prior to that, it was all just one big utopian party in a way. And so because this energy came in that sought to separate to create this idea of separation and ownership, this energy targeted the divine masculine specifically, and it tempted them and it lured them to separate from their twin souls, to go off and fight this war agenda. And so when the twins split, it caused a tear in their etheric field, which is like a scar, like an etheric scar. And so that's why it's very difficult for twins to come back into sacred union, because they hold the wound of Atlantis. And you really, really have to address and heal the wound of Atlantis if you want to come into your sacred divine union. And so I was shown that this was an experiment that was allowed to take place, and it was ultimately exactly what Magenta says. It was source, we were all just one big bundle of source energy, and source energy wanted to know itself and it wanted to expand. And so with that, it created separation, it created the other, so that it could observe itself, so that ultimately it could return home back to itself. So this is all an agenda that was divinely orchestrated. And then you get into the whole issue of what's been going on with the deep state, with the Illuminati, and they've obviously jumped on that bandwagon and have real. And I was also shown that the DNA. That's when the DNA was affected at the time of Atlantis. We were 12 strand, and then there was this manipulation took place, and we went to be two-stranded DNA. So there's been this agenda to maintain this illusion that we are separate material two-strand beings, and the whole powers that were have invested every single dime into keeping this illusion alive. So when I woke up, I was just like, what is going on? Like, we're all God. Why doesn't anyone realize that? And it was obvious that the powers that were doing everything in their power to block that truth. So that's what I'd like to say about that.
Yeah, because if we come into our own power and know that we're part of source, then we can't be controlled or manipulated anymore. And we can create beautifully in true partnership with source, which I believe was the intention. Let's create beauty together to serve all, not just make this and make $1 gajillion and I'm sorry you're hungry, which is just such a crazy, awful idea. You've got people on the planet that are worth trillions and someone hungry is just not cool. Nina, share something.
Well, Jen, I was shown something very similar, and in the healing work that I do, there's really this inverted template, which is this false twin flame relationship that many of us have been targeted by, that did begin in Atlantis. We also learned the lesson of discernment in Atlantis, because I've seen what you were just sharing, but I also saw, and I take responsibility as an embodiment of the female who walked through this. We were also very seduced by these men because they were extremely beautiful. And in a similar way, I have repeated this over and over and over, where someone looks and presents physically as what would look angelic, blonde hair and blue eyes, and you know, they're looking a certain role, and they're actually more playing the role of the fallen angel. And so I've really learned this lesson in this lifetime, and then seen a lot of women who have repeated this. So that discernment is really important, and we did begin to learn that because we were so trusting, and we were also not discerning that all that glitters is not gold. So there's so many different aspects to this, because then we have Hollywood, who has done the same thing to us. It very much has presented this image of beauty and people that are beautiful, and we begin to worship them as gods, as though they are above us, and we want to emanate them as avatars rather than remaining sovereign in our own connection to source. We start giving our power away outside of us. And this memory came up in preparation for this talk about maybe 15 years ago now. I was living in New York City, and at the time it was when this show Sex and the City was so popular. I don't know if you're all familiar with it. Okay, well, I was in my 20s. I was going to acting school and singing, and I was living it up, still exploring the shadow aspect of the 20-year-old, I guess we could say. And I was absolutely obsessed with finding the right guy outside of me, right? Because in this show, it was always about these women. They were presented as being in their power. They were presented as being sexually free and liberated, but it was always about finding Mr. Big, or which guy they were with, or having meaningless sex and becoming more like the shadow aspect of the masculine and shutting off their hearts. And this became glorified. But I had this experience where I was shopping at a grocery store. I was at a health food store, and I couldn't even be present in the moment because I was so concerned with what hot guy might come around the corner. I'm just being totally transparent right now. I was just obsessed with male, you know, the male physical hotness, like what cutie might I meet? And I had this whole fantasy that was connected to Disney and meeting the Prince Charming and meeting Mr. Big, being rescued ultimately. And I went outside, and something was just like, stop. And it put the lights on. It was like the consciousness lights went on. And I had this huge future vision of all of these women all over the world. And I feel that we're here now creating altars that were in recognition of their own marriage or their relationship with source, with divine, with God, and with their own inner masculine. And it was incredible. And this whole download came in about how this idea that searching for that outside of us, needing to be rescued, we would search for it for our entire lives. It was a never-ending search because we would never be rescued. And ultimately, the hero, the ultimate fairy tale, the divine fairy tale, the biggest, greatest love of all was with this divine romance within, with this eternal lover. And that was actually what I was seeking, rather than chasing what I had been taught to chase outside of me. So I feel like when I think about divine union, that for me is the divine fairy tale, is my forever romance with source. And that whatever relationship comes into my life, they have to understand that will always come first. That was one of the biggest reasons I had to well, Source chose for me to exit out of this last marriage, because for a man to say to you, I want you to choose me over God, it's just not possible. Or I want you to choose me over Source. That is enslavement. That is just not possible. So we get to have a lot of these opportunities to discern along the way in relationship. Is this someone who's come into my life to bring me closer to Source in me, or farther away? Rather than, well, they look really angelic and they look really beautiful and they say all the right things and they're appearing to be. And it's honestly, it's really hard sometimes. It's really hard sometimes, I think, to read really where someone is at. It takes a lot of time. It takes also having a very strong connection with Source, because now that is where my discernment comes from. And to be honest, Source warned me a year ago, you don't want to marry him, but I wouldn't listen, because Source could see in a year what would happen. I couldn't. It was all perfect also. But now it's like when I meet a man, and I meet a lot of men now, I meet a lot of men are constantly coming into my life, and immediately I just say to Source, show me through your eyes who this is. And it's like, no, 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 thank you. Rather than going, well, well, but that's been my journey of discernment.
Thank you, Nina. Welcome back, Magenta. I'm sorry if I put you on the spot there about that teaching.
No, you didn't.
Lovely library.
No, you didn't put me on the spot at all. We've had tech problems on and off all week, to be honest, and you know, internet disconnecting. It's been happening on my phone as well as the computer, so it's not. I don't think it's the internet, but I had a friend send me like an attachment, which she does often, and I think it might have been a virus. So I think I need to do a full virus scan on all of the devices. But we've had technical problems on and off all week. In fact, one day last week, everything broke down all in the same day. But yeah, the deluge, I mean, that I missed everything you all said, by the way, until just now. The deluge was a transmission communicating about a deluge of information, using a flood, a deluge, as a metaphor for this deluge of information, this flood of information, all coming in at the same time from several different sources. And the only way that you would be able to move through this deluge of information is discernment, because if you don't have discernment, the absolute result is going to be complete confusion. And within that complete confusion, you will either desperately be trying to work out who is who or what is what, and coming up with incorrect information, so led down all these false rabbit holes, or you would simply just want to shut off completely from life. That's kind of what's happening now. I mean, this information came out a year or two ago, possibly longer, but that's what's happening now. Absolutely. I mean, it was happening then, but now, you know, exponentially more so with all of this information. So that transmission was explaining how crucial discernment is at this point. I think Jen and I, we're going to do a chat about discernment, aren't we, over the next few days at some point, because we do feel it's absolutely crucial right now. Because if you are lost in this confusion, or you go down all these fake rabbit holes, or you simply just shut yourself off, you can't come into alignment with Source.
Yeah.
But that's the whole point. That's why we're being given a deluge of information, because the service to self agenda is to cut you off from Source. That's the agenda. It's to prevent the ascension and the great awakening. That's the whole point. It's not necessarily about population control, as many of the truthers think. That's just a sort of a byproduct of the actual agenda, which is to prevent the raise into the higher connection with Source, the ascension, enlightenment, Kundalini, all those things, because then that creates a whole new octave dimensionally, and then that feeds into the density of this planet, and that means the end of their finite reign. That's why they're working so hard to prevent it. So this deluge of information is huge. And the only way we can find true discernment is with the assistance of Source. Like you were saying, Nina, I caught the end of what you were saying, how Source assists you with relationships. You have to have some connection, and you might not even see that as a connection with Source or with God. You might simply see it as a clairvoyant vision or psychic awareness. It's all the same thing. It's just perceived by the body, by the mind, by the brain in different ways. So that's what the deluge was about, and it's very appropriate for now. And yes, that was a year or so ago that transmission came through.
Yeah, I remember. And it actually, for those that haven't caught it yet, it actually talks about the 3 stages that the collective has to go through. And stage 1 is like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. And then I don't need to go any further, but I mean, it's obvious. Well, we're going a little bit off track, but this is the whole light and darkness thing that's happening, right? You guys, I'm sure, are aware about this whole cuties thing that was on Netflix, right? That whole child pedophilia and pornography. And who's on the board is interesting. Obama's on the board, so is Susan Rice. All these people had to approve that before it went through, right? So it's clear. It's very clear, to your point. And fear, being the liar that it is what cauterizes people's connection to Source. And to your point, this whole effort that they're making is to keep people afraid. But once you connect to Source, I got to tell everybody, it's through the heart, through pure intention. Once you make that connection, everything changes. You literally be living in a different world. Like one thing that happened to me last week, which is really trippy, I looked out my side window and I saw sheep. It was a completely different landscape. Out of my dining room window, it was like, we don't have sheep roaming. I mean, we do in Wales. I was born in Bridgend, Wales, right? You have sheep roaming the countryside all over. But I looked out my side window and I'm like, that's so trippy. It's a different landscape. And then I was in my bedroom and it looked like I was on an ocean front. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting. This is new. So, yeah. So interesting.
Climatic.
How do you find words to describe when you're in flow, when you're in that, like I call it inspired action. It's like, it's hard to contain yourself and stay grounded. And when you're having the feeling of Source is working with you. As a small self, the picture that they give me is I'm like this big on the passenger side of my car. And like, there's this massive being that's driving the car. And I'm kind of like looking up like that. Cause even if I want to like chirp, like if there's, some of the service of self people doing things that are inappropriate, I want to chirp them on Twitter, my higher self is like, no. And I'm like, oh, okay, fine. I delete it. I can't even, operate that way. So I digress. I'm sorry. I went off track there. Anyway. Relationships and God, though, Nina, to your point, I had the same scenario, in my awakening. My partner, who I've been with them for 28 years now, 25 years married. That was a bit of a challenge for him at first too. And I remember saying to him, I'm like, please don't make me choose, because I choose you. And that's hard to hear, right? Been married to somebody for a long time, say, don't make me choose between you and God, because you won't win. Right? Doesn't have to be that way. Go ahead, Jen.
That's just the height of delusion. I mean, I've never heard anything more deluded in my whole entire life, really, because God is everything. God is absolutely everything. God is the Alpha and the Omega. It's the 0 point field where all timelines meet, where absolutely everyone merges in God. And so that's just an illusion to come out with those words, you choose me or God. That is someone who is just not awake to the true nature of reality on any level. So, that's what I think about that. So hopefully that person has grown and realized that they are God and that we're all fragments of God. So how I see God, how I was shown what God is that God is like a diamond, a massive, massive diamond, like source energy is a diamond. And each of us are fragments of that exact diamond. And when we incarnate of like with a seed, like the Christ seed is within us, and if we go along our path, our spiritual path, and we wake up, then that seed transforms to become the fruit of the Christ consciousness self. So essentially we are all God, but you could say it's in its dormant form, especially in this 3D matrix. Not if you're born an Arcturian or a Pleiadian or anything like that, you're just going to be born straight through with your source codes fully online. But when we incarnate into the third dimensional matrix, and it's to do with the Kundalini energy, which is dormant at the base of the spine when we incarnate, and our whole job and reason for living is to awaken those Kundalini serpents, and when they're asleep, they're in their dormant state. That represents duality consciousness, the I, me, separate, you, them, he, she. So when they're in their dormant state, they're separate, but as soon as they wake up and then they recognize each other, they merge at the base of the spine, and then they create unity, which is the truth. So you have duality and you have union, and God is union. And so ultimately the journey is for all of us to transform the seed of the Christ self to become the fruit of the Christ self. And mainly how we do that, how I've found to do that, is through service to others, always being orientated towards serving others. And it's never about being right. I can give a flying dogs whatever about being right. I just want to be kind. I know that I have a responsibility to bring through the paradise template onto this matrix, and so how I do that is always serving my brothers and sisters through kindness and service. So that's one big way to transform that seed into the fruit. And then also realizing, like, attaining mastery over the egoic consciousness is a very, very important factor. Realizing that you must become the observer of the thoughts and not buy into every single thought that comes through your mind. It's just like a matrix. They're not even your thoughts. They're just in the matrix. So we have to find discernment. So discernment is very, very important, and we have to become the observer of our thoughts. And when you become the observer, then the egoic consciousness is not dragging you around like a complete nutcase. And this is how you transform the seed to the fruit. There are many, many ways. So maybe we can discuss that, because it's so important for our listeners. It's so empowering of like, how can we do that? How can we really, really become our true divine self? So I'll just leave it there, I think.
It's a great segue, Jen, because I think that opens up the conversation even further. Not that we need any bigger, topic to talk other than like the source of all that is, the creator of everything. So I think it's important for folks to realize that we have potential. So like the divine does lay dormant, and the whole purpose is realization, waking up to realizing that we're divine. So we have potential, right? And that's the shadow side. We have the opportunity where we could make a choice to serve the self, or the small self, the ego self, the one that judges, the one that makes everybody else wrong, the one that needs to be right, and the one that is in fear, doesn't think it's worthy enough of being loved by God, right? So I think that's the big thing, right? Is we all have the potential, but it's with our conscious choice. As Osho says, the mind is a beautiful servant to the heart, but it's a terrible master, because it's just logic, right? It's just using the mind. There's no heart. And I heard, Magenta, you were sharing, I never heard this before, actually, the magnetic from the heart, the brain being electric, but the heart being magnetic, being the feminine energy, the softness, the nurturing, the black womb of pure potential and creation. So I just, how I teach people is through the heart. It's through the heart. And yeah, absolutely, service to self, but that service to other rather, but that can also be misinterpreted to serving ourselves, meaning that we're being nurtured and loved and honored as a mom, right? We often put our children before us, and sometimes our men might not like that so much because they kind of want to be put forward, but the children, anyway, that opens up a whole new door. So I'm gonna leave that there and see who'd like to pick up the baton and take that one for a bit of a run.
Well, I'll just say the only reason why, in response to what Jen was responding to, the only reason why someone would say choose between me and God would be if that person were to be perceiving God as a finite entity that's outside of self. And many people perceive God to be that. because they haven't come to that, as you were saying, Jen, they haven't come to that place of unity consciousness. So they can't see the multidimensionality of all things and how everything is connected. They're still in separation. So you can move into an understanding of religious doctrine or spirituality, and you can view that intellectually and actually understand it at a very high intellectual level, but without the understanding of unity, and that comes from the feeling, as you said, Paula, from the heart, you wouldn't be able to intellectualize the unity in a feeling way so that you would actually be able to experience it. So someone who says, choose between me or God, they are seeing that God is taking their partner, if you will, away from them, because they're seeing it as an outside force, an outside entity, which it is from one perspective. But from the true perspective, the perspective of unity, obviously it is in all things. So that's like saying you can choose between me or me. So
Yeah.
I think that's also, along my journey, I've definitely learned a lot about narcissists as well. And it seems that those that are very much identified as playing the role of the narcissist, it's very much about service to self rather than service to source. And in that way, they sort of view themselves as God. And they're ultimately, the question was, choose between service to source and service to me, which was basically make me your God or we can't be together, which would never work for somebody like me. And I think that that's really what those that are running the Illuminati and the Cabal, the Draconian, that is their MO. And they understand that God's source exists, but they don't want to serve source. They want to serve self. And we all have a choice within that matter.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a book called The Protocols of Zion, and actually in there it has exactly the 24 protocols that they follow. And if you read it, it's very short read, 80-something pages. It's the Service to Self playbook on how you take over a society, how you destroy education, how you destroy the young through pornography, and how to, yeah, it's quite an interesting read. But going back to source, because that's what we're talking about here, because it's the end of separation. Right, this is the end of separation. So like, let's have a little chat then for a little bit, because we do have a guest coming on in a little while who's going to provide his perspective on the divine marriage, the source, which I think might be very interesting and unique. But the best way, so everybody knows that's listening, source is going to help you get through this passage. The importance of repairing your relationship with source and repairing your own hurts, dealing with your own hurts, your own shadow side. So what do we kind of expect over the next couple of months as we walk through all this dark shadow, right? Would you like insights?
well, the nine have said to me that this will depend on perspective. So like Jen was explaining, there's this duality consciousness or unity consciousness. If you're in the duality consciousness, then these next few months, especially the next 2 months, September and October, and potentially further as well, is going to be extremely challenging. Because if you think we've had this deluge so far, it's going to increase exponentially over the next couple of months and beyond that. So what's coming is extremely challenging for someone in duality consciousness or third dimensional consciousness, because it's not just one small area that is something to worry about and something to cause stress. The nine have shown me that the dark plan is all encompassing all of the elements. So, you know, metaphorically and potentially literally, this is the human self, the attack on the human self, the attack on the mind of the human, the attack on the emotions of the human, and then geologically coming in from the sea, the land, and the skies, space, using all the elements, earth, air, water, fire, So that's where this whole larger dark plan is. But if you hold unity consciousness, you're able to view multi-dimensions within this one dimension. So September, October, November, let's just take those 3 months. That's not just 3 months on a physical level, a third dimensional level. That's 3 months of time being able to view multi-dimensional aspects each day. So every single thing that occurs, every part of this deluge, you'll see multi-layers within it. So if, say, one politician or one government individual does this action, in third dimensional consciousness, duality consciousness, you're going to think, oh, goodness me. And you will interpret that action one way, in the way that reflects the way you see that action and how that will affect your reality. But someone in unity consciousness will see, oh, that's an action, and they will see this potential, this potential, this potential, this is the bad part of it, this is the good part of it, this is the really awful part of it, and this is the really amazing part of it. So we've got a much wider perspective. And the way the nine described this is, we are heading towards, as Jen said, source being this diamond, we're heading towards this convergence of timelines that the nine call the diamond core convergence. And the energy emanating from that convergence of timelines is moving into us now. So we are able to see the greater picture, the bigger viewpoint, the actual threads running behind the scenes, literally. When you look at what's happening on a in-your-face level, from perhaps mainstream media or what people are saying or what the government are doing, there's all this stuff going on behind the scenes, and that's still only one aspect to the layers and levels, because when you move above the third dimension, there's all this stuff happening in the fourth dimension, the dismantling of the trapping systems that have been there for thousands and thousands of years. Then we have the whole galactic perspective, what we're aligning with, what's happening to the planet, the celestial. So there's so much going on multiple levels, and if you have that unity consciousness, the reason why you ride through this is because you can see so much more. Literally, your third eye is open. You have a different sight. This allows you to have different information to actually then have different action, to take different action. So you might have a room of 100 people. 99 of them are in duality consciousness. The government presents a problem, and 99 of them will all react in one way. But if you've got one person in unity conscious, they are likely to react in a completely different way, because they have much more information with which to go on, as well as the whole connection and energy and source consciousness that goes with it. So it's a package deal. So for those individuals, despite what's happening on the physical level, those individuals within unity consciousness will be able to perceive what most people see as a dystopian future that is being created. What those people in unity consciousness will see is actually a utopian reality being created, because they see so much more. So it's difficult to say what will happen, because the perceptions are so very, very complex and so very widespread and so very different. And obviously our perceptions, once they become cohesive, they actually manifest. So our perceptions create the reality. The only individuals that are holding cohesive structure in their consciousness and in their thoughts are the starseeds, are the individuals in unity consciousness, which is why this utopian diamond core convergence of realities is being created, because all of those in this duality consciousness, third dimensional consciousness, they aren't able to get into cohesive anchoring, therefore they can't manifest like the starseeds can. So from one perspective, things are looking really challenging, and from another perspective, things are looking really, really good.
Yeah, because we're really watching the collapse of one, like the Roman Empire, to use that word. We're watching the collapse of a society. And as that destruction happens, all of the stuff that's been hidden, right? So, I mean, I like to refer to it sometimes as we're living in a cartoon. This is a cartoon. And things like that cutie show on Netflix is showing our brothers and sisters that are really, really asleep. Do you see this whole idea of pop culture is completely distorted? Do you see? My husband is a police officer, because as you guys know, I teach stress resilience to first responders, and he had a look at that because I said to him, like, we have to cancel Netflix. He's like, why? And as I'm telling him, you know, Tucker has it on Fox News, right? And he was really, really disturbed, really angry. He was just like, you know, so every time the service to self structure, the Cabal, the Illuminati, show more of what they're really doing, it's kind of like that punch in the face wake up for those that are like really fast asleep, right? Which is uncomfortable. So we have that happening on one hand, but like me, as I'm awakening, as I'm discovering how nature speaks to me in ways that I was not perceiving before, a whole new magical world has opened up. It's incredible. It's like I wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh, what are we going to create today? Right? What's the lesson? Who comes across my path? And I view everybody as a gift. Like you're, you know, like you ladies, we're in the presence together. This is like sacred gift of sharing, and it's just very awesome. And tasting the air, like new abilities that I didn't have before, which is really, really cool. Like it's like, wow, look what I can do. I didn't know I could do that before, but hey, hello, butterfly. Thank you for talking to me. Oh, I do want to share one thing. This is really big. I was going to do a little video on this actually, but when I was a little girl, I was 2. I was attacked by a hornet's nest. And I had, you know, when little girls they run and they scream in their giggle. And I got bites from everywhere, in my ears, up my nose, eyelids, between my toe. I had stings everywhere. Well, I just wanted to share that last week, I learned about whole neutrality, right? The importance of neutrality. I did a sacred mushroom ceremony and I learned about neutrality and about energy. And I'm very, very pleased to say that I had a wasp on my being. I let it land on me. This is huge. This is like, I would usually scream running for the hills if there was a wasp around me. But just goes to show this is consciousness changing everywhere. That I was able to allow this insect to land on my body and just keep saying, sending you love, just being neutral, sending you love. And then he flew off and I was like, wow, I feel like I've achieved a huge milestone in my own. Anyway, I just wanted to share that about an insect. About growth, I guess. We're all growing. We're all learning and growing.
I'd love to share about how I perceive the next few months. I feel that that the deep state, what is left of the deep state, the minions, I think that they've been taken out on the higher levels. But what is being played out are there are certain minions that are going to be exerting and cranking up their agenda of separation and trauma. And I feel that the children are being specifically targeted. And so everybody really, really needs to be very, very aware of protecting their children. I would never, ever send my child into a school where they're practicing social distancing. They've got all these plastic things where they're having to wear a mask. Like I personally feel that is tantamount to child abuse, because children are sponges and they believe everything that adults say. They take it on as the truth. And so if you're saying it's just child abuse, it's psychological child abuse. So the children are being targeted. Now, as Magenta said, I absolutely resonated with every single thing you said, Magenta, and there's multi-dimensional timelines that are being played out. So that is in reference to the 3rd dimensional timeline that's being played out. And again, that can be very, very triggering for people of stuck in duality consciousness. It can be very terrifying. But for those of us that are in unity consciousness, we always see that we have choices. We have choices, and that we must choose what is healthy for us and our children. And, you know, we're just connected to that overview, exactly what Magenta says. So what I feel is being played out is that the white hats are in control, and that what we are seeing is a simulation to awaken sleepers. Just what you were saying about the cuties, even though I can't quite get my head around that, because to subject those baby girls to those auditions, just to me is a heinous crime against humanity. So I don't even understand how that could be part of the White Hat operation. I don't think it was. I think that was a little bit of a black hat move myself. But again, but somehow it's being used now to awaken so many people. Yesterday, Netflix lost $9 billion off its stock market. And so that shows how powerful we, the people, are. So I think that it was a deep state move, but the white hats have used it as an opportunity to really, really massively awaken the next wave of sleepers. So I feel that that is what's going on. There's a simulation going on whereby the white hats are in control and they're exposing the tyranny. Everything's being exposed, whereas before it was all going on in the shadows and we were just like, oh, in our comfort zone, oh, let's just watch TV and drink and eat, whatever. But now it's like all the shadows is just being exposed. And also what I've been shown is it's a timeline. So the fifth dimensional New Earth Golden Age timeline has already anchored within the 0 point field of consciousness. Now, in order for us on the third dimensional level to align and match with that fifth dimensional timeline, we need as many people, many brothers and sisters awake, red-pilled as possible, aware of what's going on. And so each person that awakens, it lifts the consciousness and the vibration of the earth and the timeline, so that eventually we're going to reach a critical mass on the third dimensional timeline that is going to align with the 5D timeline. And as soon as that critical mass happens, there will be a merge of the timelines. And so this is why it's very important for us as truthers, as spiritual leaders, teachers, whatever, to just keep waking people up, to keep red pilling, keep exposing. And because that is what is going to bring this timeline, this 5D timeline that we're all moving towards, that our beautiful POTUS is all about. He's all about the golden age timeline, and he's all about bringing back these technologies, and it is happening. It really, really is happening. So I think just trust the plan, know that the Great Awakening is happening, and do your best to share the truth, to keep exposing the nefarious elite powers and what they have been doing to our world, to wake up your brothers and sisters, and therefore we will align with this timeline. That's what I'd like to say.
Yes, I completely relate and agree with everything that's been shared, and understand that what is happening is meant to wake up the next wave and reach them how they can be reached, because maybe the people that would learn about cuties and Netflix aren't the people that would be watching the Divine Feminine Roundtable or be tuning into QAnon, you know, but they're the ones that they're going to be reached a different way. And from a 5D perspective, I had a beautiful experience last week where I saw that the tremendous love affair between Gaia and God, you know, divine feminine, divine masculine, they are ferociously in love with each other. And they are ferociously reaching for each other again as heaven and earth are merging into this 5D golden age consciousness, which is already anchored. It already exists. A lot of us are already operating there. This is an incredible time to manifest bliss or to manifest the opposite of bliss. It's really whatever you're choosing. But that this ferocious love affair, this energetic polarity, is really what it is. They are reaching for each other through us, which is why so many of us are having these extremely powerful Kundalini, orgasmic, kind of almost erotic physical experiences, overly feeling accelerated. We're experiencing it through our chakras, because through us is how they get to live out their love affair ultimately. And that this is only going to climb and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's moving at a faster and faster and faster and faster rate, which can appear as worldwide earth wrath. Because as this vibration is going faster and faster and faster, we're going to see tremendous earth changes, which is going to look like, wow, the wrath of the earth is upon us. it's not that the wrath of the earth is upon us. It's that you are either going to get on this boat or you're not, because there's no choice anymore in that they have chosen. And when two become one, and when the bride returns to her groom, this is the return to the divine union. This is the return to the divine twin flames. And the representation of that is that also we all who have and carry the twin flame template, who were hijacked from that, who participated in that hijacking, we are being prepared to be reunioned with our twin flame partners if we have not yet met them. But it's a preparation that we can't even understand. And I've been going through this process myself, and they've been saying, you're in so much isolation because you have to be prepared, because this isn't a preparation like sort of the love story that you understand as. It is a love story, but it also is about divine timing, and it's about these two master frequencies or keys. When they come together, they assist in the entire quantum awakening and convergence. So it's happening to many of us. So on one level, we have the star seeds and we have the angelics and those that are going through this initiatory process in preparation for divine reunion. And then on the other level, we have those that are very much still in 3D, 4D, who are, the 3D is very much experiencing the duality on a very 3D level. The 4D is experiencing on a very astral level. I'm receiving letters and calls from a lot of women who are saying, well, and men who are saying, wow, I'm seeing angels and demons. Whereas some of us began that process, 20 years ago, or we were born seeing angels and demons, and now we're experiencing and understanding the 5D. So it's almost like we're all operating in this together, but we're very much operating in different worlds and realities. And it's important that you stay anchored in your connection to source and your discernment, and let source guide you, so that you don't accidentally get on somebody else's path or trip and understand that maybe they need a hard lesson to wake up. Maybe they need to be in those environments to get those lessons, but you're being taken out because your source is saying to you, leave, go elsewhere, or don't go out that day. So these are the types of, this is how I am seeing it. And I just think it's awesome. I think it's absolutely awesome. I'm so excited. Seth.
So Seth is here. And I thought it was really important for Seth to join us, since we're talking about divine union. And just before I go there, Nina, you're absolutely right. It's important for everybody that's listening. Your awakening doesn't have to happen exactly like Nina's or mine or Jen's or Magenta's or Seth's. It all happens in perfect ways. And as the guides have shared with me, you can be awoken by a kiss on the forehead by the Father, or you can be ripped from your bed, depending on how you need to be woken up. But nobody's going to get left behind, which is awesome. And so Seth is here, who has an incredible story. We don't have too much time, but Seth, I wanted you to join us today to share your masculine perspective of your divine union with source, like how you feel connected to God, to source, to the divine, being in a masculine form in this lifetime. And I thought that might add some unique perspective for everyone who's been listening to us today. So welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate you guys so much. And I'm really grateful that you would offer me to come on here and invite me on. I know that's a big move for everybody here. So I want to honor that and just tell you guys that I really appreciate it. But to answer your question, it's funny because as I came in and I heard what Nina was saying, and it's so much like that. I think it doesn't matter what the gender is. It doesn't matter who anybody is, what they've gone through. Something is happening that is profound. There is a new emergence of crystalline consciousness that is emerging through all of us. And to the degree that we are choosing to be in coherence with the natural rhythms of our own body, is to the degree that our body, which is already in natural coherence or rhythms with these universal cycles that are in and around the earth, the cosmos, the more those start to speak to us through us, and the more we realize that I'm not who I think I am. I'm not what the world taught me I am. I am whatever this energy is. that is animating my form. And the more I choose to identify with that, the less duality, the less division, the less separation, the more connection that I feel to this emergent crystalline energy that feels like the best feeling I've ever felt times infinity. And it's new. It feels like it's something that's always been, it's been evolving throughout forever in different ways through different times, but it's coming out now through all of us in a way that is new, in a way that is at the cutting edge of evolutionary potential for each one of us. And to me, that couldn't be more exciting. Like Nina was saying, it's so exciting. It's like, oh my God, you know, and I get it. A lot of people are stuck and they're suffering and they're going through their stuff. And that's what we're here to help them remember. But oh my God, it can shift so fast. I mean, you can go from victim to victor in the blink of an eye if you just understand a few of these fundamental things. So that's kind of what I went through in a nutshell, just to tie it all together. And I'm left with a choice. Do I want to associate with this limitless aspect of my own awareness that allows me to literally feel and experience myself as connected to everybody and everything? Or do I want to be disconnected from that and stuck in the belief that I'm a person having an experience separate from everybody and everything, and accept that as reality when I know it's an illusory, temporary thing compared to the former? So
Yeah, I call it the heart song. When your heart sings, you can't contain the joy and the beauty, and you find joy in the simplest of things. Like, oh wow, look at the butterfly, you know. And my husband's like, it's an insect, and I'm like, but look how incredible it is. Like, Source has the most amazing creativity. Did you see? Like, I posted a picture of the blue booby bird with its blue feet and its blue beak and like the little blue babies. It's just incredible. So union with Source. It's the rhythm of the universe. And I heard you say before, I think in a previous conversation, Seth, that you, when you made the transition from victim to shadow, being fully in your shadow self, to I'm going to step into this whole idea of Source, you trusted that more. So the picture they're showing me right now is like this big being that has the hand out, and I can take the hand of God to experience this whole world of unknown mystical magic, or I can stay here limited in my 3D trapped reality, and this is the only thing I can know. Where you've got, this is it.
yeah.
Genta, you've shared that before too, about being trapped when you're not open-minded or open-hearted. When you are resistant to anything new, you literally trap yourself in a reality. Anybody else want to share?
Seth, I would love you to share about how you experienced being in a physical prison and you were not trapped in that reality, because you've actually been physically trapped in ways that none of us have experienced. And you found, you have a brilliant way of sharing this. I would love for you to share that.
Oh, thank you, Nina. Yes. So essentially, for those who don't know me or what I went through, I was physically incarcerated. I got a 5-year sentence in prison. But getting there, it was like I had 30 years of accumulated trauma, drama, karma, just all this stuff that had built up that I had never truly dealt with up until that point. And then, you know, the final nail on the head was getting arrested, indicted, sentenced, put into a physical prison where, you know, it is the ultimate ego crush, because everything you think you have and is real and all that is just shattered. It's gone. And you're left with, wow, I've been living with the illusion that I'm free, when really people or things can come and just take you out of it. And so in that place, I felt such victimization. I felt such loss. There was so much pain and disconnect. And I knew that I would continue to just spiral downward. And, you know, everything in my environment reflected back, okay, keep being worse, feel bad about yourself, feel worse, feel like, you know, because that's how everybody else feels. And I realized, I was like, wait a minute. If everything is doing this to me, or seems to be doing it to me? What if it's not? What if this is something greater? What if this has all been brought to me for me to put in a really terrible situation so that I can transmute the way it looks from the inside out? And I had just a moment of like, okay, if it is like that, then who would I have to be? What would I have to do? And I realized, well, I would have to love this place. I would have to embrace this entire experience, regardless of how it looked. And I'm like, oh my God, can I do that? Am I capable of doing that? And I'm like, well, yeah, I am capable of doing that. And I'm going to do that. And so I just kept doing it. Every trigger, every person yelling, every fight, every single thing that was serving to take me out of that, I instead almost placed like a mental reminder, like, okay, here's something that normally would make me feel really bad, but I'm going to use that as a reminder to relax even more, to feel even better. So I reversed the cues that normally would stress people out and put them in a state of fight or flight. And I use them as a reminder to self-illuminate, to self-empower. And I just kept doing that over and over and over. And I realized as I was doing that, I was creating a bridge between my conscious awareness of self and the subconscious reality of all the traumas that had accumulated in me that I didn't even realize were there. And so I was creating a bridge of conscious coherence between my conscious awareness and the subconscious. And that allowed me to feel whole again. It allowed me to get in alignment with the natural rhythms of my body, the coherence of my body. And that began activating all these dormant energy centers that were in my mind and body. And as a result of that, it just kept going, where I began to link the conscious and the unconscious aspects of my own human cognition in alignment with these greater celestial cycles that are happening. And after that, I was not in a prison. I was not anywhere where anybody could hurt me. I was literally just enveloped in, we call it love because there's nothing else to really call it, but it's what love truly comes from. It is a state of being that we truly are, when we're not stuck in the victimized, small, egoic, oh, this woe is me type attitude. And when we realize, you know what, I am greater than who I think I am. I'm greater than all the stories that I've ever heard or that I've ever believed about myself. And I may not be able to articulate it with my human senses, but I know and I trust it's there. And no matter what it takes, I'm going to live fully from that place. And it was just doing that over and over and over. And then eventually it happened.
Because with your mindset previous to this, right, Seth, you had created a prison in your own mind first, and it's so interesting that you literally manifested that experience, which was what you just took us through. And if would you share though, when you made that change in your own being, and you are swimming in this beautiful soup of quantum love in that environment, how did that change what you witnessed around you and how people perceived you as you were radiating the frequency of love through your own natural rhythms and your heartbeat and your frequency, your energetic field?
Yeah, first of all, like it's a reminder, like we are all so much more powerful than anybody or anything has ever given us credit for. And so because we don't know that, we just keep going on recreating kind of the same things that we're used to creating, which is why a lot of people don't experience really anything dramatic in their life or any great changes, because they're stuck in it. But when we realize that we're not who we think we are, and that this isn't what it appears to be, and that this energy that's animating our being and causing our heart to beat is actually what we really are. And when we choose to focus our human awareness on that, prioritize that, place value on that more than placing value on the things outside of us, then that energy begins to reveal itself for what it truly is. It's a priceless gift of life that is allowing us all to be here. And if we had any idea, we would be just on our knees in the highest state of gratitude, because it's literally such a fine line that allows all of this to happen. But we take it for granted. We're just whatever. But as a result of me committing to that and being in that state and just being enveloped by it and learning how to love my own life and others around me in it, I began experiencing a level of what we call coherence, you know, heart, brain, whole body, whole soul coherence, where it's not just the heart and brain that's in coherence. It's all the organs of the body that are in coherence. And when that happens, you, as the person you believe yourself to be, start to identify more with the energy field that you actually are, instead of the human identity that you previously identified with. And when that happens, the dam breaks loose. You're no longer damned and stuck in this very limited sort of perception. And that coherence just becomes your entire being. It's in you, it's around you. I mean, we are literally a living geometric field animating a human form. And when you're in that level of crystalline coherence, which, even though it sounds out there, it's not. It's very much in here, and it's very much something that everybody can access once they understand a few fundamentals. But when an individual is in that state and they're sustaining that state and they're holding it, then the people around them cannot help but feel it, be aware of it, or just go away from it. And that's what I witnessed. And I watched so many men who, you know, I would have thought would never know or care about being in a state of universal love, interested. They're like, what is this? How is this happening? Like, what is going on? What are you doing, man? You know, they'd be like that. And I would just tell them, it's not me, it's you. It is a part of you that is aware of the same part that I'm aware of inside of myself. And we're just able to reflect that back to one another to the degree that we recognize that holds more value than the past, than the stories, than the beliefs, than the human identity that we are so invested in. We're reinvesting our attention into something that is truly priceless and limitless. And you've been investing your attention in something that's very limited and has a low value. So.
Beautifully said. Absolutely beautifully said. I want to ask Magenta, when you see someone talking about geometric structure, because of course this is magnetics, right? We're an electromagnetic energy field. When an individual shifts their consciousness, their heart opens, Magenta, and they shift to a unified consciousness, what, in your psychic ability, what does the field, like, what are the subtle changes in the field, if you're able to articulate that from how you might view? And then I'm going to ask Nina and Jen the same question. What do you see psychically?
Well, there are so many different ways of perceiving that, and every single way you perceive it will be subjective. But for me, I work with the nine, teach me how to, that toroidal field that Seth's talking about, how to break that down into an architectural structure. So they show me a matrix. So we have the pillar of light, the vertical pillar, the horizontal pillar, and the diagonal lines coming through as infinite lines or axis, if you will. And then in order to give structure to that architectural design, we would put a boundary around it, which they call the event horizon, which doesn't actually exist, but it allows us to have balance and structure, and allows us to measure that architecture. And then we obviously have a core point to that, which would be the heart, but that also involves the solar plexus as well. So I look at that field. When I first woke up psychically back in 1993, well, actually probably somewhat before that, but around 1993, I would just see the sacred cross, just the pillar, and so just the vertical axis and the horizontal axis. I would just see that. Obviously now I've built that up with my teachings with the nine, the things that they've taught me to see this full matrix. So I look at that, and when someone is in trauma, you know, you might see that the axis is bent a little bit, or the horizontal line is not complete, or it's not an aligned color, or that there's a bit missing on the diagonal line. When somebody comes into fullness, into that crystalline coherence that Seth is talking about, you literally will see a crystalline structure. So the actual axis will light up. It will be like white light. You can see diamonds and emeralds and rubies within each of the axis. You might actually see someone, and I might see wings grow out from them. I see various kinds of wings, different kinds of wings on individuals. Sometimes I'll see animals behind them, but often it will be the axis. And when somebody wakes up into that coherence, there will be a balanced matrix. There will be a straight axis, the vertical, the horizontal, the diagonal. They will all be in alignment as an architectural structure. And when somebody becomes aware of using that as architecture, they can create that for themselves. When somebody isn't in that awareness, then the colors will be dull, things will be different and warped and twisted and all sorts. I mean, I've seen people very ill without them knowing that they were ill, and I've been able to see. Now the matrix would present to me in that respect as not non-existent, but it would be difficult to even see the formation of that architecture, and all I would see is kind of like a sort of a hazy dark energy, but not a dark energy as in an infiltration, but the illness within them that they're not aware of. There are so many different ways of perceiving someone psychically. When I used to do individual readings, so I'd see individual clients for one-on-one sessions, I would always look at their photograph before I did the session, so I could read their energy before we met. And I would often sort of open up their photograph, and instantly I would see that matrix, and I would see where the distortions were and where the traumas were, what had happened in their past, what they needed to do to align with the best possible future for them. But some people were so in alignment with that coherence, that crystalline energy, that I would literally open up their photograph, and because I'd opened up my psychic sight, if you will, before I opened the photo, the light would be blinding from their photograph, and I would think, wow, why is this person coming to see me? They're like so aligned and so bright. And so I would always, so often the color, the light levels, and the shape. It's color and shape, geometry and light. That's how I would perceive that. And as I said, everyone will see something completely unique.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. It's always have perspective. Nina, would you like to share what you see?
I would love to. Well, I see things very similar to how Magenta described. I would just add that I became aware in being very psychic that everyone is their own walking version of the Akashic records. And if you have the ability to read someone's cellular and soul movie, often when I work with someone, I will see certain areas that will light up or be highlighted. So I might see a symbol, I might see a color, I might see twisted rope. And as I go over to this area, then the entire picture show of what this is related to comes through, what this, and then the next, and then the next. So it's like, I say I track the matrix field to reprogram and re-download and reconnect. So I will see things like metallic, or maybe wires, lots of wires sticking out. Often this is connected to Atlantean inversions or DNA or cellular hijacking. There's been times when I've seen someone and they're completely almost artificially intelligent on one entire side of the body, which tells me, oh, and it's always different too. So I do find there are patterns. And so after you've done this for a while, you see certain symbols, you see certain colors, you feel certain frequencies, because you learn to read the frequencies and translate them. So you understand, okay, this is that which is connected to this. And so I will say that after many, many years, I have found there to be similar patterns in the collective and in the traumas that we have experienced, because we are all connected to that one aspect of the Akashic record of all of the experiences that we've had together. But when it changes, it's really quite amazing, because it's like I will see lights lighting up different areas. I will see new energetic rays coming in, energy colors. It's really like a light language level, as I'm doing this with my hands right now. It's really how I experience it. And when I'm working with someone even, and I'm watching the energy coming in, my hands will start moving, because it's like they are being rethreaded and rewired. And it's the same when I work with my voice. It's doing the same exact thing. It is reharmonizing all of the different notes or all of the different structures together. And as Magenta said, when this happens, what is so beautiful about it that I give thanks for after every session is that as I see this individual in their more 5D consciousness, higher self, I get to experience more of myself in that, because I am connected to all of that, and their healing is my healing. And it's always a reflection and a representation of also the exact piece that I have been asking about, or clients have been asking me about, or the current wave that the consciousness is going into in the shadow or awakening from. Like a lot has been coming up recently around union and divine union. But it's so beautiful to watch someone go from being like shut down or warped in this area to watching them just bloom. And often it's crowning or wings, radiance, diamond light, images, scents. It helps you understand really when they're in their 5D consciousness, what their role is connected to. So are they carrying more of an indigo frequency, or more of a rose ray frequency, or more of a violet frequency? Because as Jen said, we are all fractals of this diamond. And so when we come into alignment with that, that person gets to sing like they are a crystal, and they get to sing, and they get to be in this radiance and resonate what their specific frequency or their heart song was created to be, to serve source. And I do feel that as this occurs, and as more and more of this is occurring for all of us, we're creating this collective orchestra of collective heart song, which is how we ascend and is a part of that great event that is happening when we all come online essentially together.
Thank you, Nina. Jen, we'll take a couple minutes if you want to share, and then I'll share, and then we'll wrap up, because I think we're getting close to time. Thank you.
I just wanted to say, like, I really, really deeply acknowledge Seth, and thank you so much, brother. It's so beautiful to meet you, and you really touched me so deeply with your words, and it really made me cry. And I'm just so honoured to share this space with you. Thank you. And that was such a wonderful question that you asked, Nina. Thank you so much. It was just jaw-dropping. It really, really was. And I'd love you to come on my podcast, because I really want to go deep with you and explore like what you're talking about, because it's so important. And I just think it's so important for men to hear you and to have that masculine voice speaking in the way that you speak. It's like it's nectar and it's medicine. And I really want to invite you onto my platform and to share your wisdom. So thank you so much, brother. I'm so honored to meet you. I really, really am. And so that's why I put my little hand up. I just wanted to say thank you, Seth.
Oh, thank you, Jen.
And so with myself, when my third eye blasted open on top of the mountain, I suddenly had access to Akashic records. So I'd meet someone, and then I would just know what was going on. I'd know about their past lives. I'd know about their major blocks. I'd be able to pull through what their major lessons were in this lifetime, and what their major gifts were. And it's not like I don't see geometric shapes. It's just a knowing. It's just like a deep voice within me that, and it's like visions as well. I'll receive like inner gnosis, and I just generally like on the money. It's like hitting the bullseye every single time. And I apply this to my sessions as well. So I'll give like soul readings, and so I'll be able to like pull through whatever's going on. Like, what is your major block? What is it on a soul level that you have come to master in this lifetime, and I'll be able to assist you. And so a lot of the work that I do is working with, like, it's an aspect of soul retrieval, and it's working with the idea that, you know, being born into the matrix, we have very, very, very traumatic experiences, being born with asleep parents. The whole society is completely asleep, which creates a very, very traumatic environment for the soul, for the spirit. And so because of that, we're so sensitive, we're so intelligent and beautiful. When we have these traumatic experiences, it can cause us to freeze on a soul level. We can just kind of like freeze, and then that can create a loop within your psyche. So you're not actually expanding until you actually go back and retrieve that part of yourself to release that part and unfreeze that part. So that, a lot of my work is about working with trauma, core trauma, and helping people identify where those ice blocks are within their evolutionary journey. So the way I kind of like pull through the information, it's more of an inner knowing, an inner gnosis, and visions. I don't like, it's like an inner vision, but I don't really see, oh wow. But like hanging out with Magenta, I just like, because it's very rare to hang out with genuinely awakened people. Like let's not beat about the bush here, but hanging out with Magenta, she's got like butterflies just flying off her aura, like like millions of butterflies. You're like a butterfly producing being, you know. So that's what I get when I'm in your presence. I just feel this amazing sense of light and higher frequencies, but it's very, very rare to be in the presence of awakened people. Let's not beat about the bush, but yeah, that's my little bit. So thank you all so much. It's amazing.
Thank you, Jen. That was a lovely share. Thank you. And I think that was important to share, because we all have our own gifts in our own unique way, right? Like I'll get a picture and I'll get like one word, and that will be enough for the other words to follow and the pictures. So I think we're at time, everybody. Thank you so much. So grateful. I'm going to stop the recording shortly. So thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm going to stop the recording now, and then we can just wrap up.